Hello, and welcome to the Lucidity Insights podcast, Startup Spotlights. It is my pleasure today to welcome Maaz Sheikh, who is the co-founder and CEO of StarzPlay. Maaz, welcome.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you.
So for those people that don't know what StarzPlay is, it's a video-on-demand streaming service. Some might call it the Netflix of the region.
We like to think Netflix is the StarzPlay of the world.
I like that turn-on phrase. And you've already been at the helm for a decade.
Correct.
So we're going to get into it. I think there's a beautiful story to talk about here. It doesn't end with, but there's already a climax of 57% of StarzPlay being acquired for $420 million 2 years ago.
Correct.
So very exciting. Congratulations on that, by the way.
It's old news now. I mean, 2 years is a long time.
2 years, it is old news, right? I think one of the first conversations I had with you, I said, what's been going on for the last 2 years? But it does sound like there is a lot. But before we get into all of that, considering you think, or you want to think of StarzPlay or Netflix as the StarzPlay of the world, tell me, because I know that there are differences, how do you see StarzPlay as different from a streaming service like Netflix, for example?
Right. So I think perhaps the biggest difference category, if you will, is localization, right? So localization in terms of content, in terms of options to pay, localization in terms of how you can sign up for the service. So it's localizing the entire experience from our social media posts, how we engage with our fans, to sign up, to content, to payment. This whole value chain is localized because we think we understand that customer in Amman, Jordan, better than a global platform would do.
100%.
And that's been our play for last, the day when we started, right?
Yeah.
But over time, that localization advantage started to weaken and dissipate because the thing with global platforms is when they first launched, they're dealing with the whole world. And so their ability to understand local nuances is not as good. But over time, they figured the game out, right? So things we were doing in the beginning, they started to figure out, and then sometimes they start doing that better than we do. So
give a couple of examples of some of this localization that you guys had over them for a few years.
So I would say payments through mobile phones. So the ability to sign up for the service through a mobile phone number.
Versus credit cards.
Versus credit card or in-app only, right? So this was quite a unique advantage for us in the beginning because pre-COVID, in the region, especially outside of UAE, there was still a reluctance, even if you had a credit card, there was a reluctance to pay for online services. And we realized very early on that we have to solve for that. And that's why we think we built a little fintech startup inside an entertainment startup to solve that online payment issue. And quickly the global platforms started to catch up to that. And when Disney Plus launched in the market, they partnered with Do, they partnered with other mobile operators in the region. So the localization variables have to continue to evolve, right? So we need to find the next mobile payment localization angle, right? And that, for us, that continued to change over time. Perhaps our latest example of localization was going into sports. That, we got into sports 3 years ago. And because we saw an opportunity to localize our offering based on the range of audience that exists in this part of the world, from all the different nationalities that call this region home. So that was perhaps the last example of what I call the localization.
And when you talk about that localization piece, I know at the beginning what made waves was you guys having tie-ups with the UFC, but I'm actually assuming that it's actually your live cricket that is driving some of that, or more sports that are more localized to the regions that you cover, which is Middle East, North Africa, and Pakistan, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, look, it's like asking which one of your kids is favorite, right?
Right.
They're all beautiful and they're all perfect.
But there's always an answer.
So, look, I think the way I would categorize it, the way I would answer this is sports like UFC and football for us, soccer, Italian league, Dutch league, and UFC, they tend to have more of a flywheel effect with a larger audience throughout the MENA region, whereas cricket has a very large addressable audience base, but primarily in UAE and GCC. It doesn't travel well in North Africa or in Egypt.
And Pakistan, I assume.
So obviously cricket does extremely well in Pakistan, but our rights for cricket in Pakistan are different from the ones we have in UAE. Our UAE rights are much stronger because Pakistan is much more competitive to secure those rights.
Okay, so it's like a knife fight for those rights.
Exactly. But MENA, we have very strong and exclusive cricket rights.
Interesting. Okay, so localization on payments, you've talked a little bit about content going into sports. And now that, Netflix has been here since 2016, and I do want to come back to that in a moment, but they've been here also for almost a decade.
Correct.
I assume a lot of these things have happened. What are some of the areas that you're still a little bit ahead of the game? Well, sporting being one of them, but Can you speak into any additional areas?
Sure. So I think aside from sports, the other area where we've pivoted, especially in the last 3 years, is going more into Turkish content. Bringing Turkish to the region, and within Turkish, we've focused on this niche of historical period dramas that tend to do really well. So
I love them as well, personally. It feels like a good education.
Yeah, they are historical in nature.
Yeah,
and
vaguely historically correct.
Well, the thing that I find a little, you could be watching one of these Turkish dramas and you can start cooking your food and that castle door that they were trying to knock down will take 20 minutes and you'll prepare your meal, you'll finish it, you'll come back and they're still working on that door, right? So they are slow burn, but they do extremely well in the region. Each episode can be 110 minutes and then they'll have 100 episodes for each season and then there are multiple seasons.
Interesting. I wonder, is Turkish content kind of similar to how I perceive, obviously Korean content has gone super global over the last 10 years in particular. But before, Korean content went super global, you could tell in like parts of Asia, there was little bits of Korean, in Japan, for example, Korean content coming in and it was kind of making a name for itself. Is that what Turkish content is to the Middle East and Africa region? And do you see that going like global at some point?
Look, I think Turkish content is going global. In lots of ways it has. And by the way, the same is beginning to happen with Arabic content, and I'm going to share some examples of that. But I think Korean and Turkish, much like anime content from Japan, has gone global. I think Turkish has a particular appeal here in this part of the world for lots of obvious reasons, including close historical ties, close geographic proximity,
cultural similarities.
People look the same, right? So when you see a Turkish star speaking Arabic, it can easily be a Syrian star or an Egyptian star. So there's this versus seeing Tom Cruise speak Arabic, right? That doesn't go well. But,
Yeah.
So that's another reason for dubbed Turkish content working well. But I also think that just like you said, you liked it for historical reason, right? So there is a certain pride in history, Islamic pride, Islamic history pride
100%.
that comes in. And that's a reason why a lot of people watch these. So going back to your question about how are some of the other reasons, how are some of the other ways we've localized? So going into Turkish and dubbed in Arabic was one. The other one was our take on original Arabic has been slightly different from what Netflix and others have been doing. So while Netflix is, does its Dubai bling, we had a different strategy there. We focused on a reality, but a reality show focused on real estate. And
what's it called?
$1 Million Listing.
Okay,
so
yeah.
we took that format from Universal and co-produced it with our partners in Abu Dhabi called Imagination, a leading producer in Abu Dhabi. And that show is now on Roku in US and it's getting great viewership there. So so that was my example of
congratulations on that, by the way.
Taking Arabic content and putting it on a global stage.
Beautiful. I also want to ask you about this dubbing situation. What percentage of your users, of your subscribers, listen or watch dubbed content? Do you know?
Yeah. So generally speaking, the rule of thumb is Hollywood content is 99% of the time not dubbed. It's subtitled in Arabic. And that's just the way consumer behavior has evolved in the region. I mean, English, as you know, is well spoken throughout the region. That's one obvious reason. But the other reason is historically, the likes of NBC and Showtime and Orbit that became OSN, when these guys were broadcasting Hollywood movies in 80s and 90s, they didn't dub Hollywood movies. So 2 generations or 3 generations have grown up watching Hollywood movies in English. So culturally, unlike Germany or France, Europe, where Hollywood is dubbed, it never was a thing in the region. So Hollywood is never dubbed. What is dubbed is usually Turkish is dubbed because of affinity in cultures and faces, and sometimes I've seen Korean soaps being dubbed in Arabic, and we've tried that as well. But for us, at least on our platform, when it comes to dubbed, it's Turkish that works the best.
Interesting.
Mexican soaps were also telenovelas were also dubbed in Arabic.
Interesting. Okay. So as we look at this sort of content strategy, and I'm thinking about all of the content on StarzPlay, it's very clear that in order to launch a streaming service, this is a capital-intensive endeavor. Take me back to 2014. I know you were at OSN, and my understanding is that you were like actively looking for a startup to found and get going. Take me back to who Maaz was back then, and then how you came across, the StarzPlay idea. And what I really want to know, and I think a lot of the startup founders out there want to know is, and I speak to investors all the time, and they say, you know what, we fund the founder, because 9 times out of 10, the business idea that they come in and pitch with is not the business idea that they end up with. So talk a little bit into that and what your original thesis was and what StarzPlay ended up becoming.
Sure. Yeah. So I think just like you were saying, ideas rarely pan out the way you've envisioned them. So for us, when we first got started, the idea was to actually build a hardware product that would carry apps like StarzPlay and Netflix and YouTube in the region, but also have connectivity to a satellite box, because that was the behavior at that time. People were so
Apple TV.
Apple TV, but because Apple TV today cannot connect to the satellite feed.
Okay, so that was the added value you were going to add.
That was the localized aspect of that product, because free-to-air television in this part of the world is so dominant and so strong.
Yeah.
It still is strong today. It was even stronger back in 2013 and 14. So the idea was to blend the two experiences on one box, and make that the product be in every home, if you will, right? So you're watching your free-to-air television, and then you can switch to an on-demand service on the same box. But the beauty about this business would have been that it's far lower in capital needs than having your own content and launching a direct-to-consumer service. So, but when we were out in the market...
Isn't that fascinating, though? Because when you think about it off of the back, as soon as you say hardware, like most venture capital, like eye roll, like don't want to get into like anything besides software, because your margins go from 90% down to whatever, 10, 20, 30%. And then, you pivot to an idea that's going to cost, well, I don't know, tens of millions of dollars, if not closer to 100 million.
Yeah. Exactly. So,
they're like, we'll fund that instead.
But I think it was also based on, what the team's experience was, what my experience had been in the last 10 years, and the others that came with me, what our collective experience was. So our collective experience was in entertainment, in building a direct-to-consumer service.
Interesting.
So I think it was the idea that this is the background, this is the experience, and this is where the valuations are too. And this is where, because Netflix, obviously you look back in 10 years and you look at how well Netflix has done, right, over the last 10 years. So the idea was to replicate what they had done in US and Western Europe at that time.
Because to remind everyone, Netflix, when you were thinking about this in 2013, 14, 15, Netflix was only available in the US and Canada.
Correct.
And they, you had mentioned before, like, sure, some people with VPNs and who knew might have plugged in from different parts of the world. And when you launched StarzPlay in 2015, Netflix still wasn't here.
Correct.
And players like HBO were just talking about launching a streaming service. And so we really need to take people back. That wasn't the reality we live in today. In fact, I would imagine you would have to convince people about what a streaming service is and what even a subscription model as a business model is.
Correct. Look, and these were the challenges, right? This is why investors were reluctant, because, and to be honest, even the industry, I say industry because we were in the industry, the industry had its, sort of blinders on that, yes, this is happening in US and Canada, but it's not going to happen here. Well, why isn't it going to happen here? And people would point to the behavior, people would point to infrastructure and cultural differences. But the reality was all the pieces of the puzzle were there. We just had to take our blinders off because the infrastructure was there, because YouTube was already doing extremely well in UAE and Saudi, and especially in GCC, the broadband rates and the mobile broadband rates, the fixed broadband penetration were in line with Western Europe, even
Absolutely.
by 2013 or 14. So the infrastructure was definitely there. And then behavior was proven with how popular YouTube was. So to us, all the building blocks were in place, but the industry that should have made the shift didn't. And they were, and it's always the same, even in US, Netflix became successful because when they pivoted their business from DVDs, they first launched on Comcast cable on the Xfinity box. And that's when their adoption started to pick up. And because the behavior change does take time, but if there's ways to coexist with existing behavior, as it makes the shift to a new behavior, that's what accelerates things.
And this is the technology sort of innovation cycle, isn't it? Like time and time again, there's this big behemoth Goliath player that should be making the pivot to survive, not just survive, but continue thriving and building this, century-old legacy. But they become complacent. It's sort of human behavior. To be at the top, be number one. And then they also become a little slow and like bureaucratic. And then comes a tech player that, eats their lunch essentially. Yeah. But I'm curious, did you, as you were pretty high up within the OSN organization, I believe, when you left, did you have conversations internally to try and get this off the ground there? Or did you just go, no, there's not even a place to have this conversation?
No, it was, we didn't, because my job at OSN was very much focused on driving existing revenue streams and managing the core business. And I also wanted a clean, break.
You wanted something different. You're hungry for something
different. Exactly. It was something different, something completely new, and something that we would build from scratch, right? Okay. So it was, there was never that idea, if you will, to do it there.
So take me back. A lot of the people that tune in, they're curious about this fundraising process. Mm-hmm. A lot of, over 90% of startups basically fail to raise funding, raise capital. And I find your story and StarzPlay's story incredibly inspiring, particularly because if you were to take a guy who'd never had a startup before and tell them, not only do you need to raise $1 million, which even back then would have been a big amount, but we're talking about tens of millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. And you don't even have traction yet. Like, this is completely at the ideation stage. I think that's remarkable. And the other piece that's remarkable about it is because you guys didn't have traction, you don't really qualify. Well, yeah, talk a little bit about how you don't really qualify for venture capital. You could at the early stage, but the business model maybe didn't quite fit in. And then certainly not private equity, because you need to have a business that's existed for a few years that has revenue, and private equity only comes in once there's a product essentially that they can scale. Yeah, talk us through. You guys coming up with this idea, and in 2013, 14, I imagine you guys were running around, or I don't know how many of you, running around pitching this idea to try and get funding. What was that like, and what was it like? How many no's did you receive before you got to a yes?
So I think perhaps the most important step in all of this is taking that first step, right? And I remember, having this conversation with another person who was looking for similar advice, very similar question, and this gentleman was at his company, currently working at his company, and he was trying to raise a seed round and pitching it to me and asking if I'd be a seed investor. Mm. And I liked the idea, I liked the business plan, liked him as an individual. But my question to him was, if your idea is good enough for my money, how come it's not good enough for you to leave your job and be in this full time? Hmm. So that first step of leaving your stable job and leaving that bonus behind is perhaps the most important step. Because it's also sort of, you're committing to it properly, right? There's so many of us that try to, I'm going to do this in my extra time because I need the paycheck. And I completely understand those realities, right? Especially later in life, there's school fees, there's mortgages, there's expenses, there's commitments. But if you're out there raising money, you cannot be one foot in and still be de-risking and protecting your day job, right? So
I love that advice, by the way. I love that advice. I think that's totally true and honest. And so many have said, like, you have to be fully committed, because why would anyone give you a check otherwise?
Yeah. And you know, and people make a point, well, the cost of living is high, and yeah, cost of living is high, but so is the size of the opportunity and the upside. So, but seeing that commitment is perhaps the most important part.
And how long of a runway did you give yourself? Like, obviously, you know, to give yourself that commitment, it's got to be, I would imagine, at least a year runway. Like, you'd have some sort of cushion. I don't know if your wife also works. How did you get her on board on this?
Well, so it was a 6 to 9 month runway.
Okay.
And then I remember specifically, we were in month 9. And there was no end in sight on when we would close the fund, our Series A, and my kids were going to ASD, which is one of the more expensive schools there, and so then you have to make these types of choices. Do we change schools? And you know, when it comes to our kids, that's perhaps the biggest sacrifice, right? You changing your cars is no big deal, right? Moving, and we did do that, move from a much nicer, bigger place to a smaller place. And so you make those lifestyle adjustments, if you will, but then when it comes to kids and their education, the stakes are a lot higher, right? Because now not only are you dragging your future, gambling with it and gambling with the money in your bank, but you're also gambling with your kids' education. And that's a difficult one. Luckily for us, my wife found a job at the school. And so the kids' school tuition for next few years was
that's called hacking your way through life, huh? That's the ultimate hack. You can call it hack. If you're a person of faith, you call it blessing. Yeah. But something worked out. Yeah, beautiful.
And so, but I share that as an example of, and that's a result because the commitment was made and there was no going back.
Interesting.
The only way was forward. So had to figure out how we make things work. Otherwise, the plan was for the family to go back to US. And
I'm so curious. Did that just fall out of the sky, or was that like, we need to pay for our kids' tuition, and hey, you could probably work there and get?
Well, there are things that have to fall in place, right? So you can't get a job at ASD and be a qualified teacher, right? So you do have to get board certified. Yeah. She had a degree in electrical engineering already, so being able to teach computer science was a natural extension. But there were pieces that had to fall in place, and there was some prep that was going on. But it did come together at the time it needed to, but I would say that was a result of, again, taking that first step when a year earlier. So to me, that making that commitment is perhaps critical. The most important one, right? Mm-hmm. And then the second one was, like you said, we weren't quite a fit for a VC. And at that time, the VC system was just getting started.
It was sparse.
Right?
You could probably count on one hand, maybe two.
Yeah, MEVP were there. I think Beco Capital was they were just getting started. Global Ventures was just getting started. But the appetite to make a VC investment in an entertainment business, let alone a direct-to-consumer service, was definitely not there, and we weren't a fit for a VC because of the size of the funding we needed, and like you said, we weren't quite a fit,
especially at that time. Because I will correct you and say, if you were based in California, for example, what was the ask at the time? 20 million?
40
million. In Silicon Valley, you could have raised it.
Look, I spent my 90s not the 90s years, not my 90s. That's my age. But
yeah, for those of you who are
I'm
watching,
not 200 years old.
There's some beauty regimen that Maaz is doing. Yeah.
No, I mean, 40 million would be a very, very unusual check. But now check sizes have gotten bigger and
sure.
things have changed, right? And
but 10 years ago, to be fair, yeah, that would have been
40 million would have been a very big check, right?
Yeah.
And now I know AI companies these days are taking hundreds.
Yeah.
So that's but yes, for us and a VC, we weren't quite a fit. Private equity definitely out of the question at that time. So that's perhaps why I think we realized that we need to go to a strategic, someone that would validate our business plan, validate our idea, and we were speaking to a lot of studios, all the major ones, and we were very fortunate to have this alignment with Starz in US, and they came on as an early investor. But even with them, the idea was that they would commit to a cash investment, but they knew that this is a long-term game and it'll be capital intensive. So their commitment was on the condition that we can find another financial investor, another private equity that would match their investment. And be committed to the long-term business plan, not just the Series A.
And did they help introduce you to others? So I assume it was 20. They were like, "We'll put down 20 million, but you got to go find another 20 million."
Yeah, exactly.
And did it? Could you find the other 20 million through multiple investors? I assume yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, but I think once you have the strategic, at least the first conversation becomes easier with another financial or a private equity.
Absolutely.
And that was a big game changer for us once we had because they're a big name and having their commitment was a game changer for us.
And Starz is now Lionsgate.
Correct.
And so it's a studio, and they're strategic because they had a bunch of content that they offered in the US but wasn't available in the region. And so for them, it was like, we could just give you this for free and make money off of it.
Correct.
Okay.
Except when we were speaking to the studios to launch this service, most studios would say, well, take my content and give me equity against it, right? So it's investment in kind, if you will. And the challenge with that was, one, you can't build a service with one studio's content only, number one. Number two, you can't pay people salaries in movies and TV shows, right? We needed cash to develop the product.
If only.
If only, yeah. I'm sure there's a business model out there that someone will hack.
You get to watch 4 shows a day and you work for us for 4 hours.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what we were looking for was a strategic investor that was willing to put in cash, not just give their content. And so the content deal we did with them was at an arm's length.
Okay.
Because if you have multiple shareholders, you can't obviously give one shareholder an advantage. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there were market competitive content deals that we did with them.
Okay, and that was a question of mine. Was having Starz and now known as Lionsgate on your sort of cap table and one of your shareholders a deterrent for other studios to come work with you later on?
No, it was actually a big validation. Okay. So rather than having, and that's why we carry the name Starz, because it was their preference that we use that name, and having that brand helped us because it was an instant validation that if Starz validates them in US, the Starz out of US is validating these guys and their platform and their technology, then these guys must be on to something. And to be fair, we had been in the region for 10 years, so we had the studio relationships and we knew everyone in the industry.
As individuals on the founding team.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But having that additional validation never hurts. And so, no, that was never an issue. In fact, most studios, when they're licensing you content, they would like to have Disney would love to have Warner there as well, and Warner would love to have Paramount there. So especially the big studios, they like to see others on the platform as well.
I love that. No, it's such a beautiful lesson, because so many, even if you're just going after VCs, you know, the VCs like to play this game as well, where they say, well, find a lead investor and we'll follow on. And this happens around the world. And sometimes it's actually just a quick put off where they're like, they send you back home to work, you know, and it's like a polite no. And other times it's really because there are some VCs that are versed in your sector and some that aren't. And they're looking for one that can really back you and basically validate your business idea for them. And so in your instance, wow, you guys had all of these challenges and then went after a player that would basically give you credibility in the space. I want to ask you as well, did you go after high net worth individuals, and how was that approach? If you did, I assume that you did.
That was perhaps, again, at that time, right? Times change, people change. But at that time, that was perhaps the least productive. So
you had a lot of meetings.
I had a lot of meetings, and you'd meet a lot of people, nice coffees, you know, expensive watches, great shoes, expensive suits. But the reality was, for them, they could have invested in real estate and made more money and made more, faster liquidity, rather than less risk, and a product and a business they understand and can touch and feel. Yeah. So I don't blame them for not investing in us, right? But had lots of those, maybe hundreds.
Interesting. Well, that's the other strategy I hear that works if you take that high net worth angel investor route, which is you can't just go to any high net worth individual. You actually have to go to one that's, in your case, obsessed with Hollywood or obsessed with movie making, or in a past life wanted to be a filmmaker, or, you know, there's some sort of
passion,
very specific passion. And in those cases, I've heard particularly of startups who've created traction. Like we had Mohit Kumar on, who's the founder of Ultrahuman, and he found his first investors through their pilot test of sending out these wearables. And they were all like famous influencers and athletes in India, you know, and they were like, yeah, great, we'll invest $1 million here, $1 million there. And that makes sense, but it's a very strategic play, like someone who's obsessed with what you're trying to do.
Correct. And, you know, again, to frame this discussion, this is 10 years ago. So the idea of an exit and a liquidity and making returns not on free cash flow or dividends, but on an exit, right? This was largely unproven in the region at that time. So that was the other issue of what makes Silicon Valley is the risk appetite and the culture of risk taking, right? So for individuals at that time, there weren't any exits, right? Souk, Kareem, the big exits, you know, came 7, 8 years later.
Yeah.
And that's when the mindset started to change. But back then, this mindset or the culture wasn't there. But for us, it was less about high net worth. It was more finding the right seed investor that could validate the business plan even further before a studio puts in money. And this is where we were very fortunate, again, through some common friends, got introduced to a gentleman named Peter Eklund in out of Sweden, who'd done a very similar launch for HBO Nordic in the Nordic markets. And he had the industry experience, so he understood exactly what we were trying to achieve, but also had capital to give us some breathing room and some runway until we closed Series A. So he's perhaps...
so you did have an angel.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay.
We did.
So you
that was about $3.5 million US.
Okay, so you had a strategic investor, 20 mil, with all of these, if you can find an additional 20 mil. You had an angel investor who's also obviously someone you want on your board that can strategically support you and, you know, thinking of some of the challenges you're having in launching this. And then my understanding is the rest you made up from a really I would say, an investor from left field, GE pension fund.
Right.
Talk to me about how that ended. Like, what did you learn from that? First of all, that cap table makeup of these three players, and then what made you even approach GE? I didn't even know that they had a pension fund and investment fund.
Yeah. So the seed investor, angel investor, came before the Series A. So we used Peter's investment in the business to set up an entity, start developing the product. So once we decided that we're going to pivot from hardware to a direct-to-consumer service, that's where we used that seed investment to start building the apps and the platform that you see today on our service. That is our service today. So the idea was to, when we approach the studios in Hollywood, we do so with a platform that's ready so we can demo it, they can touch and feel it, to validate that we're onto something. And then once we had Starz' commitment for that 20 mil, then we started to speak to several other financial investors, and one of them was GE. And so GE's pension fund is based out of Stamford, Connecticut, outside of New York, and they have a very large fund that's mostly invested in other institutional funds or funds of funds, but then they have a carve out for international and smaller investments that they place directly rather than through other funds. And we were part of that small carve out investments that they do directly. And I think the way, if I remember correctly, the sequence of what they liked about our pitch was, number one was the team. Second was investing in the region that they saw was the right bet to make. So first the team, then the region, and then the third was the business plan that was validated and sort of endorsed by Starz. And the fourth thing was, at that time, the valuation multiples of the traditional media companies in the region were extremely high, because the idea was that someone like DirecTV or Dish TV is going to enter MENA region and is going to consolidate and pay, billions of dollars to consolidate the broadcasters of that time. So it was just a hot market and a hot region for media back in 2013 or 14. So the idea was, you don't need billions to build a broadcasting business. You need far less to build a similar business, but do it on streaming platform. And that's what GE really liked, is the idea to build a media business that's potentially worth billions, but not doing it on cable or on satellite, but doing it on streaming. I
love that. I also think there's a lesson there that no door should go unknocked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you remember how they even came across, or you came across them?
Yeah. I mean, I remember perhaps the thing that I remember the most is, you go into big private equity, shops in London and in New York. And you go into the lobby and you're in awe of the lobby, the couch that's there, and you look at some of the paintings and you're like, this painting alone in the lobby can finance my entire company. And so you're humbled with all the wealth that's there and the expensive taste from the lobby to the office to the people you see. And the interesting thing with GE was, two gentlemen come down and they're wearing Crocs and Birkenstocks and Casio watches and they're like, yeah, we manage $120 billion. Wow. Right. So that was one thing that stood out for me, is that it was a very sort of humble outfit from the looks of it, but managed very, very responsibly.
Really switched on.
But very switched on. So it was very different experience from the other PE offices that we had visited. And so the lesson learned was, don't judge the book by its cover, right?
Absolutely.
And it took us, I would say it took us 4 or 5 months to sort of get them on board.
Yeah.
So it wasn't an easy process. There was a lot of due diligence and a lot of back and forth and a lot of vetting of the numbers and business plan. But ultimately, what they liked the most was the team and the region. They believed in the region, that this region has potential for media.
I love that. Yeah, so interesting and so telling of the times that all of your investors were from outside of the region.
Correct.
Like, good for them. They took a great bet. And because at the time, I think they would have, even if they really loved the business idea and saw that it could work, it was a risky bet.
Correct. I mean, and this is part of the reason why in the very beginning we did get a lot of local coverage and press, because there was all this FDI coming into the region,
right.
And we got a lot of buzz as far as fundraising is concerned, but then there was a lot of work to do in terms of launching the service and becoming a successful business.
Right. Okay, so this is already showing how much effort there is. This is just to start the company, right? To start
this
building.
This is just to get to Series A. Yes.
Just to get there. And let's fast forward a little bit. You've raised now, is it 40 million or 43 and a half?
No, over the years, we raised over 125.
125, but at the very beginning, in order for you to start?
40.
40. Okay. And let's fast forward to now you've used this money to create this service. You've launched. Did you launch in 2015?
Correct.
April 2015. I think I've heard you talk about this pursuit of subscriptions, and that you guys had set targets. Now you look at it, you guys have 3.5 million subscribers around the region, which is amazing. But people forget that there's a period that was probably really difficult.
Yeah.
Talk me through that. I think that I heard you say somewhere, you give a talk and you were saying that you had set a target for 1,000 new subscribers a day, and there were days where only a handful were trickling in.
25 every day for months on, right? So, but yeah, it was very, very difficult and very humbling. I think and it doesn't get any easier. I can't say year 10 is any easier than year 1.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the fight is always there. And sometimes I look around and I'm like, is this just our business or every business is like this? But I certainly don't feel year 10 is any easier than year 1. It's different, but it's not easier.
But surely you have economies of scale, because now you've got 3.5 million subscribers that are telling other people about being subscribed to it. I don't know how much they're talking about that, but tell me a little bit about this, because during COVID, you also said that in the first 6 weeks, of course, COVID is a very specific event, but in the first 6 weeks of lockdown, you had more subscribers, or the same amount of subscribers than you had achieved in the 6 years before that.
That's correct. So I think that the way to look at this is you have to break the journey in smaller milestones, right? And so if you start from the very beginning, once you've committed, right, it might be locking in a seed or an angel investor. Then it's Series A, right? Then it's launching the product. I'm giving you our journey, right?
Yeah.
And then once we had the service launched and we were stuck at that 25 new subs every day, and we'd all come into our office and look at the monitor and just go back into our corners with our heads down. The next pivot for us was, okay, how do we turn that 25 a day into a couple hundred a day? Forget 1,000,
right? Which
is what we should be doing. How do we make it 100 or 200 a day? And it's that transition. It's that ability to forget about the 1,000 and go from 25 to 100, and how quickly can you make that adjustment? That type of DNA is what's needed, and we still have similar issues. Numbers are bigger, and churn is much higher, right? But it's those types of, that ability to make those transitions is what's key.
Okay. And back then, I mean, I'm going to come back to this. I get that it's hard. Subscription service is hard, but you had COVID. So, and you had Netflix come in 2016. I think that's a fascinating story. When I first asked you about it, I thought, gosh, you guys must have been, peeing your pants. But you told me that Netflix coming in with their huge marketing budgets actually educated the market about streaming services, and actually you guys saw an uptick in customers. So that's fantastic. Then you had this, pandemic event, which I wouldn't attach the word fantastic to it, but it was a game changer for a lot of behavior changes that would drive subscriptions in your business. What, as you look back now, do you wish you knew earlier so that you could have made that 25 subscribers per day to 1,000 subscribers? Like, what if there was only one lever you could pull? What would you say that is to drive subscriptions higher?
So I think looking back, we knew that credit card penetration and the behavior to pay online, especially for an entertainment service, not physical goods, is limited. But when you're going on this journey, you're always over optimistic. So while we knew that was going to be a problem, we didn't give it the fair weight that it needed. And so the reason we were doing 25 a day was because of two issues. One, awareness of our service, but two, people who were coming to our website weren't signing up, or people who were downloading our app weren't signing up because it was the payment wall. And it was the method of payment that was an issue. So that's why in the first 2 or 3 months, we quickly pivoted and said, okay, we're going to sort of slow down the investment in content and slow down improving the service until we can start building a critical mass of payment network. Because it wasn't just about integrating with Etisalat and we're done. We have content that we've launched in Saudi as well. We have content that we've launched in services launched in Morocco as well. So we had launched our service in 21 countries. Yet the only method of payment was credit card. And so that was a major sort of hurdle for us. That we had underestimated its impact. We knew that was going to be a hurdle, but its amplitude.
And at the time, was there not like Google Pay, Samsung Pay? None of that was available.
Those came later, right?
Stripe and everything came later. And so that is why you guys had to build your own solution. And that own solution essentially did what for you? So
TPay in India was getting started, and they were getting a lot of traction. And TPay was doing in India exactly what we did for ourselves. So what the solution that we created was, we started to integrate with mobile operators and their billing systems. So even today you can sign up for the service with Etisalat, and StarzPlay will deduct, or Etisalat will deduct StarzPlay's monthly bill.
That was the game changer, because every person who signed up to an Etisalat SIM card essentially had an option to turn on their StarzPlay account there.
Correct. They could pay from it. And we did that with Morocco Telecom in Morocco. We did that with SDC and Mobili in Saudi. We did that with Uridu Kuwait in Kuwait. And we went market by market.
And that was a huge game changer.
That was a big game changer for us.
And as soon as, can you think back to when you turned it on with Etisalat? I assume that took you months, if not a year, to...
It was about 3 months, actually.
3 months to turn it on. That's a strategic negotiation. How did that go? Was that a difficult negotiation? Was that difficult for you guys to get in through the door and convince them that this is a value add?
So this is one of the sort of existing sort of history and relationships we had. So the good thing is the team that was building StarzPlay, we had existing relationships with all the telcos and all the right individuals, and so we were able to build that relatively quickly. Technically, it was quite difficult, but the commercial side was fairly standard. They had standard templates because this method of payment was quite common for, remember, ringtones, mobile games, downloading games. So the method of payment existed, but integrating it with a streaming service is what was new. And so they had existing templates for contracts and relationships, and we followed those. But technically, it was a new thing for the industry.
Interesting. Gosh, we could talk about so much more, Maaz, but we are running out of time. I want to jump to, something that's very related to this. So your first partnership was with Etisalat, now called, rebranded as E&. And I believe they took a minority stake in you first.
Correct, in 2017.
In 2017. What percentage did they take?
That was 15%.
15%. And then they led a consortium with ADQ in 2022 to take 57% of StarzPlay, and they paid out $420 million for that deal. Congratulations, by the way. I think that's the exit that everyone hopes for.
It wasn't an exit per se, but...
Well, you're right, because you're still there, but it's a successful, I built something out of nothing and it was validated.
Correct.
And there's a big payday at the end of it.
The reason I say it wasn't a full exit is because we still believe there's a lot more upside to come. And hence all the shareholders are still there, right? So even Peter Eklund, who invested, as a seed investor, he's still there. I'm still there. The rest of the management is still there, and so are Lionsgate and GE. So that's why I say there's a bigger picture yet to come.
I love that. So tell me, what can you tell us about what's to come? What are you dreaming up next? What's getting you up early in the morning and going to work after this payday where you're like, this is nothing?
Look, I think. The big thing for us in the next year or two is not only to scale the business, but scale it profitably, right? So growth, top line growth is important. But after 10 years, everyone is telling us, you guys got to grow up. And that's the growing up part that we have to do. We've managed to scale the business 30 to 40% year on year.
Wow.
Even in last 3 years. So the growth rate is pretty good. We're happy with the growth rate, but our challenge is turning a profit, and that's what we have to do. And it's a challenge in our industry. It's no secret. This is it's a difficult industry from profitability and free cash point of view. So that's the thing we have to solve for in the next couple of years. If we can do that, then we create a lot of optionality for ourselves and for our shareholders.
And there was some conversation, I think, in the past about an IPO. Is that still a conversation being had internally?
Look, I think IPO would definitely be one of the options, but we have to prepare the business for it, and we still have some homework to do and some time there.
Okay.
But profitability and scale is perhaps the two most important things in our business now.
Yeah, as is for every startup, right? Profitability and scalability. Last but not least, Maaz, leave us with some words of wisdom. I would love to hear from you. You've been at the helm of StarzPlay for 10 years. Obviously, the founder and CEO from 10 years ago, Maaz from 10 years ago, is probably a very different man to the one that's sitting in front of me now. And StarzPlay is kind of like a relationship, right? I would imagine it's a second marriage for you. Tell me what you've learned from your time at StarzPlay and how it has changed you and perhaps your leadership, but also you as a human being.
So I think the first thing to qualify is to highlight that at StarzPlay I was a first-time CEO. Mm-hmm. And a lot of us, my colleagues, were first-time, COOs, first-time CCOs, and that's okay. And we all sort of to some extent learned on the job, and to some extent brought our experiences. So for me, certainly, I was a first-time CEO, and I'd never been a CEO before. And when I look back, I think there were times, I think especially after year 4 or 5, we'd hit a certain amount of scale. I think we'd crossed 50 million in revenue. We'd crossed a couple of million subs. And there was a serious reflection at least in my mind, that is it time to bring in one of my former CEOs who's much more experienced and perhaps skilled at running a bigger operation, running a bigger team. And not only did I have the conversation in my mind with myself, I also spoke to Danny, who's my co-founder in this venture from day one, and also spoke to some shareholders on the board. And even though times have been hard and you go through lots of ups and downs, I've been very fortunate to have, whether it's people like Danny as my colleague, or board members who've put their hand on my shoulder and said, look, people go through difficult times. Every CEO does, every founder does, but we invested in you and we're working with you. Not with your former CEO that you think you can bring in and run the business. He might be able to do that, but we're here with you. So I think for me, the biggest reflection has been that everyone goes through ups and downs, and this journey is very difficult. So one, you have to have a deeper purpose. Mm-hmm. And you need to connect and dig into that deeper purpose when things get difficult. 2, if you're fortunate, you're surrounded by people who believe in you and not only see the person that you are today, but see the person that you can become 10 years from now. Right? So people who invested in this business, they didn't see a first-time CEO. Clearly, they saw something in me and the team that we could become in 10 years. And that was a big, faith and trust in them. And so even today, I send emails to our board, and I end my emails by saying, thank you for your trust and confidence in the team, because to me, that has been extremely important to keep us going, because the business does go through ups and downs. And for the shareholders and for my colleagues to stick around and believe in me is obviously very important.
Beautiful. Maaz, thank you so much for your time today. I think there's so many wise little nuggets that a lot of startups will hopefully save for a rainy day when they're struggling and they go, well, he did it.
Absolutely.
So thank you. Thank you for sharing your time with us and sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck with the profitability and scalability journey ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Lucidity Insights was founded on the premise that educating startups on the regional tech ecosystems and the key stakeholders within them will not only lead to a healthier and more sophisticated startup ecosystem, but it will also lead to a stronger startup economy, which will benefit the economies of entire countries and the emerging MENA region as a whole. You can check out more at lucidityinsights.com.